So we have some updates in the battle to end the NFA's restrictions on suppressors. The recent decision by the Fifth Circuit protecting the NFA's restrictions is now heading up for re-review. This all comes after the Trump DOJ recently decided to change their position on suppressors, and they found that these are in fact protected arms. However, the Trump DOJ continues to argue that the NFA's restrictions on suppressors does not violate the Second Amendment. So let's talk about what is happening now in this critical case that is heading to Fifth Circuit en banc panel review. Now, before we jump into this video, if you guys want to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to subscribe to the channel. That helps the channel to grow, and also double check to make sure YouTube has not unsubscribed you, because they love to do that, especially on two-way channels. I also want to thank one of the main supporters of this channel, which is First Form. You guys know that First Form's an amazing company. I really enjoy all of their supplements, their protein powder, their pre-workout. I even have one of their energy drinks right here that I drink pretty much every morning for the most part. But one of the really cool things about them is their culture is unmatched. They're pro-freedom, pro-America, and they support the Second Amendment. So if you're interested, check them out using the links down below. And also, if you order something $100 or more, you can get free shipping on that order. And they also have a money-back guarantee on all of their orders. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, in this video, we're going to be discussing a suppressor challenge that was recently ruled on by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals by a 3-judge panel, but now it's heading to Fifth Circuit en banc panel review. This case is called U.S. versus Peterson, and it deals with the constitutionality of the NFA as it applies to suppressors. Now, for those not aware, in this case, essentially back in 2022, both federal and state law enforcement officers raided the home of Mr. Peterson, where he also had a home-based FFL, and this happened in Louisiana. So a federal task force of ATF agents and then 50 other law enforcement officers executed a search warrant at his home and also that home-based FFL. They searched the gun store, they searched his own personal residence, and out of all of this, essentially all they found was a single solvent trap in a safe in his bedroom that was not registered under the NFA. And out of this entire incident, it's the possession of that single solvent trap that has now led to this challenge. So in response to the charge against him, Mr. Peterson filed a motion to dismiss the charge based on the Second Amendment and what the Supreme Court recently said in Bruin. Now, on review, the court denied his motion to dismiss the indictment, and that led Mr. Peterson to appeal to the Fifth Circuit for the first time. Now, on the first review of this case, the 3-judge panel in the Fifth Circuit sided with the Biden ATF and the Biden DOJ. The Fifth Circuit found that a suppressor is not a necessary accoutrement of a firearm, and it's not required to make a gun useful or functional. Mr. Peterson and his counsel at that time decided to file for a rehearing en banc to the Fifth Circuit, but like I mentioned, that petition was later pulled, and the original ruling of the lower court was removed because of the Trump DOJ shift, where suddenly they were saying, yes, suppressors are protected arms. Well, even after all of that, the 3-judge panel on re-review still upheld the NFA's restrictions in their recent ruling. The Fifth Circuit 3-judge panel still ruled that the NFA can regulate suppressors since the process operates as a shall issue permit, which the court believes is permissible under Bruin. Now, under one of the concurrences in some dicta issued by Justice Kavanaugh, essentially here the court was arguing that CCW schemes may be generally permissible if they apply objective criteria like background checks, fingerprinting, and fees and things like that. But here the Fifth Circuit twisted the Bruin CCW permit ruling and the dicta there by Justice Kavanaugh to justify the NFA registration and taxation scheme. That is why this ruling is so concerning. In essence, the Fifth Circuit's holding here now stands for the proposition that any permit system restricting two-way rights may be allowed as long as it operates objectively. However, that ruling is now being challenged and it's up for en banc panel review in the Fifth Circuit. Now, in that petition, Mr. Peterson argues that the panel mischaracterized how the NFA actually operates. He argues that the panel wrongfully equated the NFA's taxation and registration scheme for suppressors to something like a shall issue CCW licensing scheme. But here the Trump DOJ continues to argue that the NFA is allowed because they say it operates as a shall issue permit. Now, in the recent response of the Trump DOJ, they asked for the Fifth Circuit to deny en banc panel review of this case. In that response, they state that the panel correctly held that the NFA's restriction on the possession of unregistered suppressors does not violate the Second Amendment. As the government's earlier filings explained, the NFA imposes only a modest burden on the possession of suppressors. The NFA's restrictions are consistent in both the how and why with historical laws regulating weapons that were particularly susceptible to criminal misuse. They state that Bruin also upheld similarly modest schemes such as shall issue permits. In the panel, they state here already analogized the shall issue license to uphold the NFA's application to Peterson's conduct. So they said that, the NFA operates similarly to how shall issue permits operate. They go on to try to downplay the impact of the panel's ruling by also stating that, additionally, the panel's decision would not allow the government to impose taxation and registration requirements on every privately owned firearm in the nation. They state, as the government's previous filing made clear, registration laws or taxes on ordinary firearms would trigger a different analysis because such laws would impose a more severe burden on the right to keep and bear arms. Further, they state, the panel's decision was not as far-reaching as Mr. Peterson claims. The panel made clear that it decided only that Peterson has failed to develop any argument or record to show that the NFA is unconstitutional as applied to him. They state that indeed the panel neither foreclosed the possibility that another litigant may successfully challenge the NFA's requirements, nor suggested that a taxation and registration requirement on every privately owned firearm in the nation would be constitutional. So that's the horrible ruling that was issued by the panel there in the Fifth Circuit. But now the Trump DOJ is also asking for the en banc panel here in the Fifth Circuit to deny review of this case. They continue to argue that the NFA operates as a shall issue scheme, and they state that the impacts of that ruling are not as serious as we're all concerned about, and we shouldn't worry about this because this would be isolated only to Mr. Peterson, and a new person can bring a new claim against this whole NFA structure, and it wouldn't allow this type of taxation and registration scheme for every firearm. So they're saying that, but the way that the court wrote this ruling, it actually opens the door for those potential types of situations. That's what's currently going on in this critical suppressor challenge that's currently seeking Fifth Circuit en banc panel review. We will see if this is granted en banc panel review by the Fifth Circuit, and if it's not, well then we would likely see this go to the Supreme Court and seek Supreme Court review. However, right now there are two other cases dealing with the NFA and its restrictions on SBRs, and it's yet to be seen yet if the Supreme Court wants to take up those issues. And still, even in those SBR, Supreme Court cases, you still have the Trump DOJ fighting against those and arguing that even the Supreme Court should not grant review to those cases. So I anticipate they would do the same thing with this Peterson suppressor case once it makes its way to the Supreme Court. So that's what's currently going on in this case. As we get more information, as it develops more, I will let you guys know. If you like this video and you would like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, you can check out two of these videos here on the screen that the YouTube algorithm thinks that maybe you would find helpful to you or educational. But as always, thank you guys so much for all of your support. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.